Good morning, everybody. Hey, so I just wanted to do a short little video today to go over a product that I'm kind of testing out right now, and that is ND filters for my GoPro. I picked up some ND filters. They're by Tellison, and it came as a pack that comes with 3 of them. It's ND4, ND8, and ND16. And right now I've got the ND4 on there because this is the one that you're supposed to use on like cloudy days. The N8 is supposed to be one that you use on a sunny day, but it's still kind of cloudy out, but there is some sun break. And then the N16 you're supposed to use on like absolutely like no cloud coverage, maybe a tiny bit, and just super bright sunny days. Since it's morning time and it's pretty overcast out, a little bit foggy, I've got the ND4 on here. So pretty much the major point to using an ND filter on one of these is to give the image a much more natural look, to give it motion blur. So while you're watching this, try to pay attention. If you've watched previous videos, especially like the last couple that I put out, if you pay attention to like the sides, the road, things like that, stuff that is in motion and passing by me should be a little bit blurrier. It should look like what the human eye would see, like what I'm actually seeing, you know? Because when a GoPro runs by itself, it's in full control of the shutter speed and all that good stuff. And what it ends up happening is it's able to capture like every little detail while you're moving, so things don't look quite as natural. Like if you were to cut a still image out of most of my moving footage, you would be able to see a ton of detail. Let's see what happens as I'm accelerating here. From that light, we'll see like how do things look on the edges now. Do they look blurry? You know, does this look more realistic? I'm gonna test out the N16 filter this afternoon, and for my camera settings, basically what you have to do when you're running an ND filter on a GoPro, especially one with any kind of stabilization, is you do have to turn the stabilization off, unfortunately, because apparently GoPro's stabilization relies pretty heavily on light. And since these are basically like sunglasses for your camera lens, you're not going to get a full amount of light. So you do have to disable the stabilization. So I've already done that. That's a little bit of a bummer because I do like the stabilization. It's one of the whole reasons I even switched over to the Hero 7 from the Hero 4 Black. But hopefully the image still looks pretty good. You do have to change some settings in your camera in order for this to work. So one of the whole reasons you do this is to take manual control of your shutter speed. And so what you want to do is you want to use the 180 degree rule, I believe it's called, and you're supposed to basically have your shutter speed set at double your frame rate. So whatever frame rate you're recording at, your shutter speed should be double of that. So like right now I'm recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. So I have manually set my shutter speed to 1/60th of a second. If I was recording in 4K at 24 frames per second, which a lot of people do to get like the most cinematic feel as possible, I would set my shutter speed to 1/48th of a second. And if I wanted to shoot something in slow-mo but also use my ND filter, you know, say I want to set the camera at 120 frames per second, I would set my shutter speed to 1/240th of a second. So basically whatever your frames per second is that you're going to record at, you need to double it in your shutter speed in order for this to work. And once you do those settings, you have to run the ND filter or else your image is going to be overexposed, because the shutter speed will be allowing too much light into the GoPro. That's why you have to give it one of these ND filters to act as sunglasses. But having manual control over the shutter speed and being able to slow it down is what gives you that motion blur. Because if your shutter speed can run at like a full 1/1000th per second like it naturally would want to, it's going to let in not so much light, but you're going to be capturing, you know, so many images over and over and over and over and over again, that's why like GoPro footage doesn't look super blurry like in its natural state. It's because it's capturing so many images just over and over and over again. So that's why when you take a still image out of a natural GoPro, you can capture a lot of detail, but it also looks like you're standing still. Like right now I'm doing 80 miles per hour, and this is kind of that test for higher speeds. You know, this should give you a sense of that motion blur on the road and the lines around me and stuff like that. So we'll continue this video a little bit later on when I'm on my way home and it's nice and bright and sunny out, and we'll try out the ND 16 filter. Alright, so here we are for part number 2 of ND filter testing. It's the afternoon. The sun's out, but there is a little bit of cloud coverage, and I think it's going to clear up as I get closer to home. But anyways, I went ahead and threw the ND 16 filter on here. Probably could have got away with using the ND 8 for the amount of cloud coverage that's out right now, so hopefully the image is not too dark, because obviously as you go up in the number on the ND filter, that is more light that it's blocking. I've also got my ISO set to a maximum of 800 right now, so hopefully that's enough for the current light situation. You do want to record with as little ISO as possible, like while still having a clear image that gives, like, you know, good credibility to how bright it is outside. The lower the ISO, the less noise you're going to have. So by manually setting the ISO, I'm able to create less noise in the image, so to speak. In some rather unfortunate news, I'm going to have to stop by the shop on my way home to see if they have a battery in stock for my bike. I've noticed the past couple days maybe that it did seem a little like off, like it didn't seem like it kicked quite as fast, but I wasn't really worried about it. It didn't seem like super out of the ordinary. Like it wasn't like you know, like it wasn't super slow. But came out to my bike to leave work just now, and it clicked and it almost didn't start. So I shut it off and let it sit for like a couple seconds, turned it back on, and it cranked super slow. It was like and fortunately on one of those it fired off, so I got to ride home. Do not shut the bike off, don't stall, no nothing, because if I do, it ain't firing back up. But this will be a good test going across the bridge here for the ND filter as far as motion blur, because as I pass by cars and you're able to see the white line ahead of me right now, it should give a pretty real sense of motion blur. And this is not my favorite place to lane split, because people on this bridge are just, they don't care. Everybody's just gotten off of work and they want to get home. They're not really paying attention to like their side view mirrors. Not that they really pay attention to them at all much in the first place. Like nobody's even moved an inch for me so far. So you really have to pick and choose here in California when you want to lane split. So I did download a short little clip from the footage I took this morning, and I thought it looked pretty good. The motion blur looked really nice. And I actually went ahead and I ripped a frame from without the ND filter from a previous video, and I also ripped a frame from this morning so that you guys can see in a still image in a singular frame that the camera's recording the difference in how much detail the camera is allowing to be picked up and how that motion blur is created. Because what we're doing is we're slowing down the amount of times that the lens opens and closes and allows an image to be processed. So by doing that, we're creating less detail, so to speak, as things are passing by. And that's how you get your motion blur effect. Like I said in the beginning, GoPro, I think, records like with 1 in 1,000 second on its own. And of course, you're going to be able to pick up a ton of detail when you either pause that or slow it down. So with that, you're going to be able to pick up a ton of detail when you pull the singular frame, because you have more of them to choose from. So since we took manual control of the shutter speed now, and we're down to 1/60th of a second since I'm recording in 30 frames per second, it's going to produce an image that has much more motion blur, and it's going to look a little more natural, and it's going to look like I'm actually moving when you pull a frame instead of me looking like I'm sitting still, as you can see from the images that I ripped. Alright, so now that we're off the interstate, I feel like we can talk a little bit more. Just go ahead and do a recap without having to worry about any wind noise ruining any of the audio. Just to recap real quick, why do we use an ND filter? for that natural motion blur effect in your images. When you're doing a point of view, like riding a motorcycle or riding a bicycle, a car, that kind of thing, and you want to get the most realistic look possible, an ND filter is going to be your way to go. That's how you're going to be able to get that natural motion blur effect. Everything that's passing by you is going to look like what a normal human eye would actually see in real life. So if you're looking for that, you're going to have to pick up some ND filters. Do not expect these things to have a whole lot of impact on like color or anything like that. Like, these are not used for color grading. Color grading is an editing skill. You know, if you have a certain preset like a LUT or something like that that you put on your images, continue to use those LUTs, or continue just to use, you know, the internal GoPro coloring, which is what I do. I don't really mess around with any of the coloring when it comes to editing my videos. I'm not really good at that stuff. But you can buy some presets for like LumaFusion, which is the editing app I use, and you could go that route. Do not expect the ND filter to really affect the coloring. It will affect the lighting aspect of it, and that's why you have to be careful about which one you're using, making sure you're choosing the correct shutter speed and the correct ISO for that feel that you want. Also, some rules to follow while you're using the ND filter. The whole point of this is so that you can take manual control of that shutter speed. When you're using the ND filter, you're going to want to make sure that you set that shutter speed like I talked about. You want to set that shutter speed to double what your frame rate is. So like I said, I'm recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, which means I'm going to set my shutter speed at 1/60th of a second. If I'm going to shoot in 24 frames per second, then I'm going to set it to 1/48. If I'm shooting in 120 frames, I'm going to set it to 1/240th, and so on. So just make sure that you set your shutter speed to double what your frames per second is. Last thing I'd say that you want to play with, which I haven't played around with too much, I'm just kind of guessing. Like I said, I think my ISO is set to 800 right now for maximum, and my minimum is 100. You're going to want to go outside on a nice sunny day, put your filter on, your ND16, and play around with your ISO. See what's the lowest ISO that you can set where the image is not too dark and you're getting the least amount of grain in your image as possible. So I'd really like to get some feedback from you guys. What do you think about the image you're seeing now compared to some previous videos? If you haven't seen any of the previous videos, just go check any of them out from the past last few, like maybe last 3 or 4 videos. Obviously there has been a change with my camera setup. I'm using the Hero 7 right now. But let me know what you think. Do you like this way better? Do you like the old way better, where it's just all from the GoPro natural, no ND filter, nothing like that? Or do you prefer having that extra motion blur from the ND filter? Do you think it looks a lot better? Give me your feedback in the comment section. I'd really appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel if you would, guys. There's more content to come. Like the video if you found it helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.